I'm police investigator Henry Lando. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the incident. I need you to help me find that woman.
What was your first day, my dear?
Not good.
The closer you come to where we are now, the amount of people that have encountered the woman increases.
When are we gonna see some action? Why did you bring us here?
You are here because your family belongs here.
That's a fucking weird way to put it.
Oh, it feels so good.
I need you to come to me now, my angel.
Watch out! What did she want from me?
If I were you, I wouldn't want to get hurt even more.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fresh Cuts. My name is boys. It's Mr. Venom. How's it going, Venom?
Greetings and salutations, world travelers. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, Mike. How you doing?
Doing well. Going through a little bit of a water restoration project in the kitchen, so get away and get that off my mind for like an hour or so. So, also with us, it's Don and Ellie. What's up, Don?
Yeah, what's going on? Always happy to be here.
All right, so this week we are covering the movie Cuckoo, which just released in theaters. And let's take the synopsis off IMDb. A 17-year-old girl is forced to move with her family to a resort where things are not what they seem. Directed by Tilman Singer, written by Tilman Singer. People might or might not, because I don't know how widely it was watched, but his movie Lose, I think it's pronounced, Luz. Yep, that's currently streaming on Shudder, by the way, for anyone who's listening that hasn't seen this, that maybe wants to check out his previous work, because I think a lot like when we did Oddity, we brought up like stylistically similarities to that director's first movie, Caveat, and I think this one also has some style similarities. The story way different, obviously, but there's just certain aspects of this one that I felt like maybe, like if you didn't know it was the same director beforehand, you could put together after if you watched both movies. But anyways, all right, so we're gonna start with general thoughts on Cuckoo. Venom, what did you think of the movie Cuckoo?
All right, I feel like this movie is gonna suffer a similar fate to The First Omen from earlier this year. And what I mean by that is The First Omen had the misfortune of being released 2 weeks after a film did the same story but far superior. Obviously, I'm talking about Immaculate and The First Omen coming out 2 weeks after that. Now, Cuckoo, once again, just like The First Omen, Cuckoo is a very well-made movie, very well acted. In fact, our two leads, I think, give stellar performances. Hunter Schafer as Gretchen and Dan Stevens as Herr Koenig. Just some stellar performances here. I really, really liked both of them. Honestly, everyone in the movie did a fine job. But back to my original thing. This movie is going to suffer the same fate, I feel, as The First Omen, because there are other films that were maybe not as recently released, not in this calendar year, but at least in the last couple of years, there were a couple of films that I feel did this story a little bit better. And I also feel like those movies, which I'm not going to name yet, only because it might be a little bit of a spoiler for this film, but I feel like those other movies that I'll name later on are so much more subtle with their messaging, whereas Cuckoo is very, very heavy-handed. I mean, well within the first half of the movie, you kind of know what's going on before we even really get much of the reveal of what Herr Koenig is actually trying to do here at this facility in Germany. Ultimately, It is a beautiful film. It is very the cinematography is beautiful. The score, I really like this score. A lot of the score kind of emulates around one song that our main character Gretchen is kind of learning on bass. And as she's a musician, she's a bass player, she's in a band. Unfortunately, because of a tragedy at her house, she's forced to move in with her father, who is in the process of moving to Germany for an architecture project that he is working on. And so she's separated from her band. But throughout the film, we still see her playing her bass and learning some of the songs that the band sent to her in a music file. So I feel like this. Oh man, how can I put this? From a filmmaking aspect, I think this movie is stellar. Like I said, the cinematography, the score, the direction, the editing, the performances. I think from a filmmaking standpoint, nothing can be taken away from this. But as I'm watching this, and especially once we get to the halfway point and we start learning more and more about the story, I started to feel myself kind of feeling like I did when we did The Watcher. Whereas The Watcher, the first half of the film, the mystery is, kind of cool and, you're curious. But as you start getting more of the reveal of the story, at least I personally started to lose interest because, like I said, there are other movies that have done this story better. Now, if this is the first Cuckoo style movie that you've ever seen, then you're probably going to think this movie is great. And it is. Ultimately, it is very good, bordering on great. It's just, like I said, it's one of those things where a certain movie from a couple of years ago left a much deeper impression with me while telling this exact same style of story. So as good as this movie is, as much as I would imagine most of us are going to recommend you see it, I just feel like this is one of those been there, done that situations where when you've been watching horror films for as long as all three of us have had, you see similarities between movies, and sometimes it kind of takes you out of it because it's like, oh, this is way too heavy-handedly similar to this particular movie, which is a movie that was in my top 10 for that year too. So that speaks to what I'm saying, how that other movie did this story so much better. And, during our walkthrough, I will obviously talk about those two movies. But like I said, for the spoiler section, for the general thoughts, I'm going to keep it to myself on the off chance that people haven't seen this yet. But ultimately, I say go see it. Hunter Schafer does a great job as Gretchen. Dan Stevens once again nails it. Dan Stevens is having a spectacular 2024. He already was the kaiju dentist in Godzilla X Kong earlier this year. He was one of the villains in Abigail, probably one of the more likable villains in Abigail because of how smart he was and how decisive and everything else. And now here he is taking another turn as a genre villain, and I think he's absolutely nailing it. I'm not sure if Dan Stevens actually has any German heritage, but goddamn does he play a good German villain. So ultimately, despite my shortcomings with the film, I would say this is still a very, very well-made film that I think should be seen in theaters. If you've seen this director's first movie, Lose, obviously, as Mike said, the story is very different, but the filmmaking style is very much the same. Again, I can't really get into too many of the similarities without getting into spoilers for this film. So I would say, yeah, this is a very good film, well above average. I don't think it's going to be in my top 10 only because of the other films that this one reminds me of. Like when I came home from watching Cuckoo the first time, I wanted to go and watch one of those other movies because this one reminds me that there are other movies that did this story better, more proficiently, and less heavy-handed too. I mean, to the point that this movie is even called Cuckoo. I mean, before you even walk into the theater, if you know anything about the cuckoo bird, you basically already know what's coming. And I was really hoping that the title of the movie wasn't a reference to the bird, the real-life bird, but as it turns out, it is. So that kind of gives away some of the story that we're getting. And unfortunately, like I said, the movie is a little bit more heavy-handed than some of the other ones that I will praise later on. But ultimately, this is still a very good film. If you've already seen Longlegs and Oddity and you're looking for a horror film to watch in the theaters, I think this is a good standby. Before we start getting a glut of other films in the coming weeks and months. We got a lot of horror coming in theaters. So if you're like me and you're always looking for horror to watch in the theater, you could do a lot worse than Cuckoo. But if you haven't seen Longlegs and or Oddity yet, prioritize those movies first. Those movies are going to just be a lot more compelling, better stories, better acting, things like that. But ultimately, I did really enjoy Cuckoo. Like I said, it's unfortunate that it came out after those other movies that did the story better. So I'll leave my general thoughts at that for now.
All right, let's hear from Dawn. General thoughts on Cuckoo.
Yeah, this one pretty much right from the get-go was one that was not for me. I will say I do agree with Venom. This, on all technical standards, all the, any kind of the marks you want to throw against it, passes. It's, great acting, great, production quality, great, look, great editing, all those hallmarks. I'm just not into movies for that reason. I don't like watching great technical prowess. I mean, just look at my review blog. That'll give you an idea of like the kind of films that I watch, and that'll give you an idea of like the quality and standards that I'm willing to, watch and get by. And okay, yeah, even though on a technical scale this is, miles better than that, it just didn't grab me. And it's basically because, as Venom said, the more that this gets drawn out, the less intriguing it becomes. The story just goes off in different directions that just remind you of so many other movies that, okay, if I'm just going to be watching this one just to see how well made it is, I'm not that interested in it because I'm not a person that enjoys a film for its technical standards. Again, see my blog. But the fact that that's kind of what all of it's relying on, just because the story just makes no sense and it just keeps on piling on all these. I don't really want to go there. That's kind of a spoiler, but it's just, the initial half of the film is intriguing enough. It does keep your interest. There is something, nefarious hidden behind everything. And it kind of just has this mysterious quality that drags you in. But then all of the reveals, it just makes it seem like it's cashing in on other stories that have told something similar. And as it goes along, that just kind of makes it less and less intriguing. You're not really seeing anything new. It's all of these performances, but all you're watching is for, the location, the editing work, the, performances. And as good as that is, for me personally, I'm just not interested in that. That doesn't appeal to me. That doesn't intrigue me. I don't follow into that kind of cinemaphile kind of mindset. So yeah, it just didn't really register with me. It, kind of just dragged on. I will say, if you're not kind of bothered by that and you're more intrigued about, watching stellar performances, watching, a well-made film, in theaters that deserves to be, because it looks amazing. There are some creepy moments here and there. Just, if the familiarity with the story is not going to be an issue, then yeah, you would probably like this more than me. But, the more that this dragged on, the more we know about what's happening here, the more everything just kind of fills in the blanks. It just feels more and more like I'm just watching a film to watch technicians craft a movie. And as great as that is, that's just not me. I'm not interested in that. So yeah, it kind of limped along. It feels a little, bloated, but it's just one of those where it's just not a film for me. And if you're fine with that, then, go ahead and give it a shot. But yeah, this one, it's just not, something I'm going to return to. It's not one that I'm going to, think about much after it's gone. Just, okay, yeah, I've seen it, but, that's pretty much it. So, yeah, don't really have much else because I'm not really quite sure what to spoil, just because so many of the reveals are so much about this is, going to be spoiler heavy. I don't quite know what else to say, so I'll just leave it at that and kick it back to you, Mike.
All right. So, I will say out of the three of us, I'm probably the highest on it. I kind of feel like the way Don described like the things that don't impress him necessarily is like the opposite for me. I dug the technical aspects of the movie. I liked the score, the soundtrack. I also agree with Venom. Like the story, like lots of the story elements, you've probably seen it in other recent movies. Although I'm not sure. Like I'd have to rewatch some of the other ones to say for sure whether or not I like them better. Because my initial thought was I actually liked how it was done in this movie more, but that's based on seeing these other ones like a couple years ago at least, only one time. I haven't seen them since, so maybe because this one, maybe I have recency bias on this one because I just literally saw it a couple days ago. But at the same time, I also think this one, it felt like it possibly held back in some aspects, like it was building up for some more like graphic or over the top or bigger things to happen, and they sort of didn't come. I know I think I referenced the director's first movie. I feel like this director has a writer director. He's starting to, I mean, it's only two movies so far, so I don't want to necessarily say habit yet, but he does like using kind of like the abandoned like set location where like a couple people stumble into it and like a confrontation happens, and he's good at setting up like the creepy set pieces like that. The story, it could probably be a little more refined because I agree once you kind of know what's going on, it starts to feel a little dragged out, I guess. At an hour and 42 minutes, it probably could have been cut to like shorter 90 minutes and still accomplish what it was trying to do. Overall, I thought the performances were well done. Let's see what else. I do like the performance of Hunter Schafer. I thought very well done, although passing as a 17-year-old, questionable. Questionable.
She was supposed to be 17.
Yeah.
17.
Holy shit.
Yeah,
I
because
almost felt guilty about the fact that I was about ready to jerk off to her.
Well, you heard it here first.
I must have missed that. Wow.
Yeah, I like that there's a lot of characters in this movie where the way the story is written and we know like little bits and pieces, you don't always know who's like good or bad, or sometimes like there's definitely no doubt about it, bad characters in this, but then sometimes like the good characters aren't fully kosher either. Like, yes, they're not as evil as like the most evil, but they also have their own intentions in what's going on. So I like that. I guess overall I just liked it more than you guys, but I also agree with like the criticism. So it's kind of like it's probably going to be everyone that sees it, your own personal taste or what you thought the elements, how strong they were. I did think there was a few scenes in here that did have good tensions. One that I think it's in a hospital that's really, really good, kind of like a chase scene. And then there was one scene in here that I thought was really well done. It was just more action than horror, but it was still like cool. Like we had two characters going at it pretty well. So overall, yeah, I would say go see it. But I also agree, yeah, Long Legs and Oddity for straight horror movies are probably going to be your best bet if you're just in the mood for straight up horror. But if you are in the mood for something a little more absurd or bizarre mixed in with the horror, I think this one gets the job done there. So I'll leave my general thoughts at that. Back to you, Venom.
This movie also adds to the year of the police procedural. Even though the police procedural elements in this movie are fairly minimal because it's just one police investigator, it's still present. So if you remember last week for our Trapped review, I kind of dubbed 2024 the year of the police procedural between Maxine and Long Legs and stuff like that. Now here we have Cuckoo. So, and all of those movies are all, Maxine obviously, left me wanting a little bit more, but most of the other ones I thought were really, really well done. And I definitely don't want to get twisted that I may not have liked this movie. I did enjoy this movie. I legitimately did. It is a very well made movie. It's an objectively good movie. I'm the kind of guy that when a movie reminds me of another movie so heavily, it starts to just take me out of it, As soon as I realized that The Night House was basically Final Destination 2022, it started to take me out of it a little bit. And, that's just one of many elements like that. So, and ultimately every horror movie can't be so ultra original that it doesn't remind you of something else. But at the same time, this movie was just a little too heavy-handed with its messaging. To even name the film Cuckoo, I don't know, I just thought that was a little bit of tipping your hat to the audience way earlier than you should. But again, that's a personal opinion more than anything. But yeah, I definitely think that the other movies that I was talking, that I still haven't named, which I'm about to as we get into the walkthrough, are just far superior to this one, despite this movie being very, very well made. Like I said, this is a really, really good movie. Just because I'm a little disappointed that the story is not as original as I would have liked it to have been, doesn't necessarily take anything away from the film. It's just I'm not going to rate it as high as I might had I not seen those other movies, that do this story as well. So, well, obviously we can't keep being this cryptic. So this is going to be your final spoiler warning, folks. After this, I'm going to go ahead and get into the walkthrough. If you have not seen Cuckoo, I would urge you to watch it. It's a very well-made film. We've had a few weeks in a row now of some decent movies. We'll ignore Trap, but of some decent movies releasing in theaters. So if you're a horror fan, it's a little bit of a mini golden age. So definitely get your asses to the theater and check out some of these great movies that are all playing right now. So there you go, folks. Final spoiler warning. So, Cuckoo. Before I get into the walkthrough, let me go ahead and reveal the movies that I was talking about earlier. I think one of them is going to be very obvious, and that's Hatching from a couple of years ago, from 2022, out of Finland. This is a movie that basically did this exact story, but did it under the guise of a creature feature. And maybe because I'm more partial to creature features, as most of you know, we have a creature feature side cast under the No More Room in Hell umbrella. So I obviously, because of that, I think Hatching just worked a little bit more for me. I also think that Hatching was a slightly better made film. I think the idyllic look of that family, how they were social influencers, looking like the perfect family despite all the troubles that they were having under the surface, how bright and colorful the movie was at the beginning. As the movie goes along and as the creature starts to kind of develop and we start to understand what's happening, the kind of dreariness of the filmmaking starts to set in. I just feel like Hatching was a slightly better made film than Cuckoo, despite Cuckoo being a very good film. And then the other one, which maybe wasn't as heavy-handed as either Cuckoo or Hatching, is Vivarium from 2020. Vivarium is another movie that kind of loosely did the Cuckoo story to the point where they even told a fuller, more complete version of the Cuckoo mythology. The Cuckoo story that we get in this movie is incomplete, but at the same time, the elements of the story that they skipped don't really have a big impact on this particular movie, specifically because the child in question was an only child. So, but we'll get into that as we go. So here we go, my friends. Cuckoo. We open up in a house in Germany. We hear a couple of German, a couple arguing. They're fighting. Like it's getting really, really heated. Suddenly, we see the teenage daughter upstairs in her bedroom, and she looks like she's having some kind of mini seizure. She's in her bed. She's trembling, shaking. But then suddenly she decides to leave. She walks out the front door, and at the exact moment that she walks out the front door, based on the arguing in the background, you could tell that dad may have done something to mom, because literally they're arguing back and forth, and then you hear like not necessarily a smack, but like a thump. You hear like a thump, and then suddenly the argument stops, and then you hear Dad start to cry. So obviously Dad went off the deep edge and potentially may have killed his wife. At that moment, our teenage girl, a very pretty blonde girl, basically just runs away from the house into the forest, and that's our cold open. So obviously, out of context, we have no idea what any of this means, but it will connect to the film a little bit later on. After this, we're introduced to Gretchen. She is a 17-year-old American girl who is recently had a tragedy at home. We're not 100% sure what the tragedy is at first. We kind of find out, and I wasn't aware of this until my second watch, that we're not technically aware of what the tragedy happened at home until more than halfway through the movie. I think we all kind of assume it as we're watching it, but there's no confirmation of what the tragedy was until halfway through the movie. So, like I said, Gretchen's a 17-year-old American. She's now having to live with her father because of a tragedy that happened at home. They are in the process of moving to Germany, where they are going to live temporarily while the mom and the dad, who are architects, help build this new resort that Dan Stevens' character, Herr Koenig, is basically, he's like a billionaire, an eccentric billionaire who has ties with the medical field and hotels and things like that. So he's just an ultra rich guy. Like I said, he was the one who invited this family to come out there to live with them, not realizing that Gretchen was going to join them. Obviously, Herr Koenig isn't privy to all the information of Gretchen's past. On the day that they move there, we're also introduced to Alma. Alma is Gretchen's younger half-sister. They share a father. Gretchen's father has remarried to a very pretty Asian woman, or Asian-esque woman, hard to tell. And they went ahead and had a child. Dad had a child with his new wife, who Gretchen does not consider her sister. There's a couple of occasions in the film where somebody will call Alma her sister, and she'll correct them and say, no, she's not my sister. Even though she is her half biological sister, she's basically denying any connection to this little girl. And then, of course, we're introduced to Mom and Dad. Like I said, I think Dad's name is Louis, and Mom's name is Beth. Yes. Dad is American, like I said, and they are now here in Germany working on this resort. On their first day there, Herr Koenig, Dan Stevens' character, offers Gretchen a job at his resort. Basically says, there's not really a lot to do here because we live, kind of out in a resort area. There's not like a downtown area, no shopping, malls, things like that. So he basically tells her, since there's not really much for a girl your age to do, how about if I give you a job at the resort? She ends up going ahead and accepting the job. And in the very next scene, we see her on her first day at work. We're also introduced to Beatrix, who most people will call Trixie in the film. Cute little redhead. This girl is French, actually. So you're going to hear German and French, and I think even a little bit of Italian. I think I may have heard some Italian floating in there somewhere. So you're actually getting, but everything is subtitled. Don't worry, Americans. Yeah, you'll understand what everybody's saying.
Yeah, it would make sense because one of the main set pieces, like a hotel where a lot of tourists come in and out. So yeah,
and they said that they were right near the Italian border, I think. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it makes sense that there's a lot of foreigners around. So like I said, it's Gretchen's first day, and Trixie, the cute little redhead that has already been working at the resort for a while, is basically training Gretchen. While Gretchen is being trained, a woman and her husband are walking around the lobby of the resort, and suddenly the woman vomits. She just pukes right on the floor out of nowhere. The husband is very apologetic, says sorry, but chases after his wife. And apparently Trixie doesn't even really react too crazily. I mean, you would think in a high price resort like this, somebody pukes in the lobby, somebody might get a little pissy because they're going to have to clean it up. But Trixie was just like, oh, don't worry about it. Almost like they're used to it. Keep that in the back of your head. So, let's see. One day, Gretchen is practicing her bass in her bedroom, and her sister Alma walks in. I forgot to mention that Alma is a mute. She's not deaf. She can actually hear, but she doesn't speak for whatever reason. She communicates through sign language. So one day when Gretchen is in her bedroom practicing her bass, Alma walks in and starts kind of, not mocking her, but like emulating the moves that she's doing on her bass, like pretending to play guitar. Obviously, she looks up to her older sister, so probably she's at that age where she wants to be like her older sister. But then suddenly we start hearing a screech, and this is a screech that we heard during our cold open. I didn't mention the screech, but yeah, during our cold open, when our little teenage blonde girl runs away from home, we hear a screech that will become a very familiar screech throughout the film. And we're hearing it again right now. And as soon as the screech sound effect starts playing, Alma starts shaking like she's having a seizure, like an epileptic seizure. Now, this is where the movie starts to get really kind of weird. Gretchen notices that her sister's having some kind of seizure. She freaks out. She gets scared because she didn't realize she was in her room. She has headphones on. And she takes her bass off and goes to help her sister. And then the scene resets. Like, literally, it goes back to where Gretchen is playing and realizes that Alma's in the room and realizes that Alma's having a seizure. So again, we watch her take her bass off, put it down on the ground, and walk over to Alma to see if she can help. Then once again, the scene resets. So it looks like we're dealing with some kind of time loop situation, maybe. Keep that in the back of your head, even though I don't really think it's all that vital. But yeah, so obviously because of this screech that's happening, Alma's having a seizure, and Gretchen is going through some kind of weird time loop where she's just repeating the last 3 to 5 seconds. She's not like repeating whole days or anything crazy. And it only happens like 3 or 4 times. Eventually, Alma snaps out of her seizure and like scratches Gretchen on the face. Like, hard enough that Gretchen goes flying up in the air. Like, this little girl, it doesn't make sense that this little girl has this much power that she could just scratch her sister's face and send her up in the air a couple of feet before she comes crashing down. And the parents come in at that moment. I think because Gretchen has such a bad past with drugs and, being a musician and everything else, that they instantly think that she did something to Alma, but it was obviously the other way around. Alma attacked her. So the next day at work, Trixie asks her what happened to your face. She explains that her sister attacked her. And then, she didn't say sister. She said my father's daughter. And this is one of those scenes where Trixie corrects her and says, oh, your sister. And Gretchen again is like, no, she's not my sister, blah, blah, blah. Now, earlier in the film, Herr Koenig told Gretchen that she would never have to work at night, that she, would only work day shifts, and that she would be able to go ahead and ride her bike home or get a ride home from him. He obviously is very worried about her, but not really explaining why. Like, he's almost adamant that he doesn't want her riding her bike at night by herself. What ends up happening is that night, Trixie ends up working a deal with Gretchen where Trixie will get to leave early and go to her little liaison with one of the local police officers, while Gretchen stays and closes up the hotel. That night, after Gretchen is by herself, the first thing that happens is we get a strange girl named Ed, who's from Paris. And she basically starts, very mildly flirting with Gretchen, and we kind of see Gretchen start to crack a smile. So obviously we're starting to realize that Gretchen might have, lesbian tendencies, and this girl is very obviously flirting with her. She asks for a room. Gretchen gives her a key to the room, but then just as the girl, the stranger, I'm going to call her, as she starts to leave the lobby, yet another woman shows up. This time she's half naked, completely disoriented, and she ends up puking right into the cooler. They have like a cooler of soft drinks and shit in the lobby of the resort. She literally pukes right into the cooler and then grabs a can of soda, opens it, and chugs it, downs the entire thing. The whole time, Gretchen and the stranger are trying to get this girl's attention, but she's like almost catatonic, just not answering anybody. So eventually the stranger says, I should follow that girl and make sure that she's okay. She ends up following that girl to a pink cabin that ends up being the lover's nest, as they call it. It's like the honeymoon suite in like a, big priced hotel. And we end up seeing the stranger follow the disoriented girl who just puked to her cabin, but then that's it. We don't see anything past that. What we end up seeing is Gretchen back at the hotel, back at the resort, and she's locking up. She decides to lock up. It's 10 p.m. It's closing time. So she locks up the hotel and jumps on her bike and starts to ride away. Literally at the exact moment that she rides away from the resort, here comes Dan Stevens, concerned for her. He doesn't want her riding, as I've already said, he doesn't want her riding her bike at night. And in this scene, we find out why. She is riding home, and then suddenly she looks over to her right, and she sees someone running in the distance, running parallel with her. Almost like, to me as a horror movie viewer, it looks like the person running was running after her. But apparently Gretchen didn't get that alarm that this person was potentially chasing her, because she just keeps riding her bike. Like I said, she's like, what's the word? She's parallel. So she's basically, I would say, maybe 50 to 100 feet to the right of Gretchen riding her bike on the road. And this woman's like in the woods, in the grass. So what ends up happening is, as the ride continues, Gretchen starts to realize, based on the shadows that are being cast from the streetlights above her, that something is chasing her. Somebody's right behind her, about to grab her. She finally turns around, and what we see is a blonde woman with red shining eyes. She's wearing sunglasses, but behind those sunglasses, her eyes are glowing red. So obviously, we're not sure if it's just the glasses. Maybe it's just one of those light up eye, glasses like ravers use, or if this woman's eyes are actually glowing red. But eventually, the woman starts to do the familiar shriek that we've heard a couple of times throughout the film. So we start to see the source of the shriek. It's this woman in a beige overcoat with a blonde wig and sunglasses hiding red glowing eyes. Gretchen ends up seeing that there's a hospital right around the corner from where she is. So she decides to pull into the hospital. It's like I said, it's past 10 p.m. in a small village in Germany. So this hospital's doors are locked. She hits the call button at the front of the building. A nurse does end up answering, letting her in. Just as she gets in to the hospital, she closes the door behind her, and then she turns around to run into the hospital, but she doesn't realize that it's like a double door. It's like two sets of doors right behind each other. So when she turns around to run into the hospital, she goes head first into the second set of glass doors, breaking the glass and cutting her head open pretty badly. Like she's bleeding pretty profusely. At this moment, the woman who was chasing her is now right outside the door, on the other side of the door, and she herself is pressing the call button. And you can almost hear the nurse on the intercom saying, okay, I'm coming. So, we're thinking, oh shit, she's going to let this woman in and she's going to kill Gretchen. Instead, a nurse shows up at the lobby entrance. And at the exact same time that this nurse shows up, a police unit shows up. Literally just pulls right in, and the woman has disappeared, of course. The blonde woman in the trench coat at this point has disappeared. Now, Gretchen is taken in. She's, treated for her head bump. When she's at the hospital being treated for the bump on her head, she realizes that her whole family is here. They somehow got there before her, but not because of her. As it turns out, Alma, the little sister, had another seizure. And Dad is starting to get concerned. She's never had seizures before. What is going on? One of the local doctors, who actually turns out lives on the resort that, where everybody is kind of staying, she says that potentially Alma has childhood epilepsy, and that this could be something that stays with her forever. The dad asks what could be causing these seizures. she starts talking about how potentially changes at home, lights, flashing lights, loud sounds, trauma, things like that could potentially cause the seizures. So Dad starts to blame Gretchen for Alma's seizures because Gretchen is, not the greatest example of a sister and, doesn't really interact with Alma very much, blah, blah, blah. So they're starting to blame Gretchen for all of this. Now, after Gretchen leaves the hospital, with her head patched up from, the bump on her head that she got, she goes back to work the next day. And the stranger is there, and the stranger says that she's going to check out. She only ended up staying for one night. But again, the two girls are they're kind of subtly flirting with each other, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, the stranger asks Gretchen if she wants to go to Paris with her, like just out of the blue, like, do you like music? And Gretchen's like, yeah, I like music. And she's like, well, you should come to Paris with me. And Gretchen is so unhappy with her situation in Germany that she accepts instantly. She's just like, yep, let's go. I don't give a shit. I got nothing here for me. She ends up going with the stranger in her car after emptying the cash register at the resort. So she literally robs Herr Koenig and then goes into the car with the stranger to go to Paris. On the road, they end up almost literally running into the strange woman in the trench coat and blonde hair. And the stranger ends up having to swerve out of the road to not hit her, which of course totals her car. The car flips over. The stranger in the driver's seat is completely knocked out, but Gretchen comes to. She's in the car upside down. She's bleeding. We see blood, running up her face, because don't forget, she's hanging upside down. So blood is running up her face into her eyes, and then suddenly the screeching woman shows up and starts reaching for the car. She actually pulls the stranger out of the driver's seat, throws her to the side of the road, and then tries to climb into the car. At that moment, as the woman is trying to climb into the car, we see headlights from another car show up, and then the scene fades to black, and we hear two gunshots. Two gunshots are fired. When Gretchen comes to, she's at the hospital. Her arm is broken, and it's in a major, metal sling thing. I mean, it looks like she must have broken her arm in multiple places. Her legs are all bruised up. She's got cuts all over her face and neck. She's actually got bruises on her neck that almost look like she was strangled, which was kind of weird. I was kind of confused about that. I don't know if maybe the screeching woman maybe got to her before she woke up or something and choked her a little bit. I'm not sure, but yeah. Anyway, so Gretchen is all bruised up in the hospital, and obviously Herr Koenig is at the hospital visiting her, and he doesn't even seem to be really upset about the fact that she robbed him and tried to leave Germany, tried to leave with all the money that was in the register. He starts telling her a story about, he starts asking her, can you smell the food that's in front of you? Like I said, they're in the hospital and they both have food in front of them. He starts asking really cryptic questions like, can you smell the food? Or is it just odor receptors going up into our nose and, touching our nasal passages, giving us the illusion of smelling? And obviously Gretchen is just a 17-year-old kid who doesn't seem all that intelligent, so she just kind of shrugs her shoulders. After a very cryptic conversation with Herr Koenig, he ends up after Dad walks into the room, Koenig ends up just leaving. And when Dad walks into the room, we see him start packing up his stuff. Now, for the last few days, Mom and Dad have both been staying at the hospital with Alma, the little girl. But now that Alma's been released, now Dad is packing up his stuff and they're all going back home, leaving Gretchen alone at the hospital. Gretchen is terrified because she thinks that this woman might come back and attack her. Dad instantly turns into super douche because he snaps at her and tells her there was no woman. Stop making this shit up. You're the one who's doing this to Alma. You're the one who's causing her seizures. Stop being so stupid. If you want to run away, just get on a fucking bus and get out of our lives. Like, Dad just does not care about his older daughter at all. He's just concentrating on his younger daughter, which, instantly makes Dad a kind of a little bit of a piece of shit, but, whatever. She takes a nap in the hospital. When she wakes up, she has the police officer Henry that she met earlier in the film. Earlier in the film, she briefly met Henry. He introduced himself as a police investigator, wanting to investigate the attack, of the screeching woman against Gretchen the night at the hospital. Like I said, when Gretchen wakes up that morning, Henry is there and he's talking to her and he's like, I told you not to try to do anything stupid. I told you that I could protect you if you just stay around here and blah, blah, blah. And, so he's almost admonishing her for trying to leave and getting into a car accident. So finally, Henry takes Gretchen to his place. And this is where we find out more and more about Henry. Henry, as it turns out, was married at one point years ago, and him and his wife stayed at that resort for their honeymoon. Apparently what had happened was they were attacked in the middle of the night by a strange woman. Henry passed out, which is kind of a common thing that we see where sometimes people who are around the screeching woman will pass out from the audio. If the screeching, like if you're not the specific target of the screeching woman, you'll just kind of go into that time loop thing and just kind of lose track of time. Whereas her actual target will, cover her ears and, it's almost like a sonic boom is going off in their ears, blah, blah, blah. So, Henry talks about the fact that on their honeymoon, they were attacked. He chased a woman who attacked his wife into the woods. But then when he got back to the hotel room, the wife had already choked on her own vomit. Again, a recurring theme, women vomiting in this movie. Why are all these women vomiting? I wonder. So now it is... I skipped the entire scene. I'm so sorry. I skipped an entire scene with the little redhead, Trixie. If you remember, Trixie talked Gretchen to staying late that one night. Trixie ends up going and having a get-together with Eric, one of the cops in the town. Obviously, it's a sexual encounter. She's butt naked, just wearing a towel. But then when Eric gets to the lovers, what was it called? The lover's nest. The pink cabin at the resort. Eric is freaked out. He's like, what are you doing here? We got to get out of here. It seems like all the authority figures in this town know not to be out at night, but they're not really sharing with anybody why. So he actually gets mad at Trixie, tells her, get dressed. We got to get the hell out of here right now. Trixie is mad. She doesn't understand why. She ends up, basically giving Eric the cold shoulder. They end up making up, and Trixie starts to basically get ready to go. Trixie then is attacked by the screeching woman. And by the way, when all of this is happening, Henry and Gretchen are actually there doing kind of a kind of sort of stakeout where they're watching the cabin, waiting for the screeching woman to come back and attack, hoping that she'll come back to attack. As it turns out, she does show up and attack. She attacks Trixie. She does a weird thing where she kind of boxes her ears. When you take your open palms of both your hands and kind of slap them on the side of somebody's head to kind of deafen them for half a second. And it's pretty dangerous because I've actually heard of people like rupturing eardrums because of doing that shit. So anyway, Trixie's out cold. What we see while Henry is running towards the cabin to get inside, we see the screeching woman reach between her own legs. Like she's wearing a dress. We see her reach between her legs, and then she pulls out her hand, and her hand is just completely wet. It looks like it's got mucus all over it. And she's holding something in her hand that's clear. It looks like a clear egg. of some kind, a clear egg-shaped thing. And she actually starts to reach towards Trixie, almost like she's going to insert into Trixie's vagina what she just removed out of her own. But at that exact moment, as she's about to do that, Henry walks in with a gun, takes 2 shots. Henry is a terrible shot, by the way. We see this throughout the movie. He takes 2 shots at the Screeching Woman. Both of them miss badly. The Screeching Woman ends up running out into the woods. Now, this time, while Trixie is out cold on the bed, she starts to vomit. Like, we start to hear the sound, the upchuck sound, like she's about to vomit. So Gretchen is quick on her feet, and she actually puts Trixie on her side so that she doesn't, choke on her own vomit, much like Henry's wife did years earlier. So at this point, like I said, Henry tells the whole story to Gretchen about his wife and getting attacked and blah, 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 blah. So at this point, Gretchen is at home. It's now the next day. Gretchen's at home, and when she wakes up, I don't know if it's morning or afternoon, whatever time Gretchen wakes up. When she gets up, she realizes that Herr Koenig is there. And Herr Koenig, Dan Stevens, is giving a gift to Alma. And it's a wooden flute, a pan flute that he's been kind of playing periodically throughout the film. Very ominous sounding wooden flute. He ends up giving it to Alma as a gift. And then while he's there, this is when Gretchen kind of has a little bit of a breakdown, because she's like, why are we here? Why did you make my family come here? And if you saw in the trailer, because this line is in the trailer, I did watch the trailer after the film. Dan Stevens says, you're here because your family belongs here. And this is one of the most real, authentic responses I've ever fucking seen in a horror movie. She literally throws up her hands and says, why the fuck would you say it like that? That doesn't make any sense. Her father gets mad at her and literally kicks her out of the room. But she has a valid point. Why would you say it like that? Your family belongs here, Gretchen. Like, yeah, you're not trying to be ominous at all. Again, a little heavy-handed. And also, along with the gift that he brought for Alma, the flute, he also brought a package that was delivered to Gretchen, but it was actually delivered to the hotel, to the resort. And as it turns out, the box is all of Gretchen's mother's personal belongings. Now, Gretchen is confused. Why is this stuff here? It should be at the house. This is when her father gives her the news that he sold the house. The house that she shared with her mother after her, biological father and mother got divorced still was under the name of the dad. Gretchen, I think, was under the assumption that, and by this point, we've gotten the confirmation that Gretchen's mother has passed away. She had passed away earlier, before the events of this film. And like I said, she starts to get freaked out. And again, I fucking love Gretchen so much. I love her reactions in this movie. And then what does she do after her father tells her that he sold the house? She literally punches him right in the fucking face. Goddamn, I love Gretchen. I'm sorry. I love this girl. Guilty pleasure right there. So she goes running up to her room. She opens up the box. She sees all the pictures and everything else. And there's also an answering machine in there that apparently after Gretchen's mother died, she would continue to call her house phone because her mother's voice was on the greeting on the answering machine. And that was the only way that she could hear her mother's voice. So there were multiple messages on the recording of Gretchen basically crying, saying, I don't like it here. I regret going with dad, blah, 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 blah. And then she's about to turn the answering machine off, and there's one more message on the machine that she's never listened to. It turns out it's from her sister Alma. Now, I told you that Alma is a mute. She doesn't speak, but she does have a smartphone. And on her smartphone, she actually has an app that speaks for her. She basically, she types in what she wants to say, and then the app speaks for her. So it's very, dry, metallic sounding, almost robotic, not quite robotic, but, borderline. And the message basically says, this is Alma. I'm really worried about my sister Gretchen. She's always calling you and you never answer her. So obviously Alma is not aware that Gretchen's mother has passed away. And she basically continues in the message that I think you should really call Gretchen. It would make her really, really happy. And also, if you would like to visit, you're always welcome here. Please, I think it would make Gretchen so happy if you came and visited us, and you could stay with us for as long as you want and be with Gretchen. When Gretchen hears the message on the machine, suddenly her whole opinion of Alma changes. Now, Alma's no longer that half sister that she doesn't even recognize as a sister. Suddenly she realizes, holy shit, Alma's the only person in this family who actually gives a shit about me. So, suddenly it goes from her just looking out for herself to her looking out for Alma as well. So what ends up happening is Gretchen and Henry go to the hospital. And at this point, Alma's parents have all left, and all extraneous staff have already left. So the only people still in the hospital are like Herr Koenig and a few of his staff who are part of the plot that's going on here. And this is where we find out what exactly is going on, because in the previous scene, Henry gives the story of the cuckoo. And if you don't know the story of the cuckoo, I'll give you the short version. A cuckoo, which is a real-life bird, is called a brood parasite, B-R-O-O-D, a brood parasite. What that means is that the cuckoo will lay its eggs in the nest of another bird and then leave. They'll just leave their eggs in the nest of the other bird, so that when the cuckoo chick hatches, the bird in the nest thinks that it's one of their chicks. Even though it could be different colors, different sizes, all the mother bird knows is that, oh, it hatched from an egg in my nest, so it must be mine. So that's the basic story of the cuckoo. The other element of the cuckoo story that no one mentions in this movie, and again, it's not ultra vital because Alma doesn't have any siblings her own age, but in nature, when the cuckoo lays its eggs in the nest of another bird, when the cuckoo chicks hatch, they will murder their siblings. Not their natural siblings, not the other cuckoo chicks that are in the nest, the chicks that are supposed to be there. They literally... the cuckoo is literally only a few days old, but it has the instinct to kill its siblings by basically using its wings and pushing their siblings out of the nest. Once they fall out of the nest and fall to the ground, mom's not going to be able to save them or anything. So, yeah, so they skipped that element of the cuckoo story in this movie. Again, not ultra vital. It was definitely more vital in Hatching and Vivarium than it is here. That's why I kind of feel like Hatching and Vivarium did the story better, because they did a more complete version of the story, which is fine. Again, if this is the only Cuckoo movie that you've ever seen, you're gonna love it. It's a great story, even with the parts that they skipped out on. Obviously you wouldn't know that they're skipping out on it, so it's not that big a deal. So back to the movie. At this point, Henry and Gretchen have returned to the hospital. All the staff have left other than Herr Koenig and a couple of his staff. And we see Alma on a gurney with a bunch of diodes and cables and everything else, attached to her. And we also hear one of the other doctors talking over the intercom, basically saying, basically going over once again the basic story of the cuckoo bird. But then they talk about how they found a species of humanoid cuckoo birds. So, humanoids that exhibit the characteristics of the cuckoo. And what they do is, do you remember earlier when I talked about the screeching woman reaching under her dress and pulling out something globby and trying to stick it in Trixie? That's it exactly, my friends. She is trying to get her egg into Trixie so that the next time Trixie has sex, it'll be that egg that gets fertilized, not Trixie's actual egg. So it's a version of the Cuckoo story. I'll give them credit for originality because they're incorporating humans into it, whereas Hatching and Vivarium kind of do it a little bit more straightforward. So like I said, I'll give the movie a little bit of credit for some originality. Now, what ends up happening is the doctor is continuing to talk about the Homo cucurus, I think is what they call them, Homo sapien cuckoos, and how the traditional cuckoo, the cuckoo bird, when it lays its eggs in another nest, it leaves forever. It has no interest in ever seeing its children or finding out if they're okay or whatever. But in Homo cucurus, they apparently return after 8 or 9 years. They basically they implant their egg into a surrogate mother. That egg then gets fertilized, and then 8 or 9 years later, the donor mother, as they called it in the movie, starts seeking out their daughter or son, their child, basically, and that they will kill anyone that gets in their way. They'll kill the parents of the child, the siblings, anybody else. Unfortunately, just as they open the door to expose, because we still don't know who Alma's donor mother is at this point. It's obviously the Screeching Woman, but we don't really know who the Screeching Woman is. So what ends up happening is there's a standoff at the hospital. We see Dr. Koenig, Herr Koenig, Dan Stevens' character, kill all the other doctors in the hospital with an assault rifle, basically just starts mowing down everybody else that's in the hospital. And then he goes to the room where Alma is, where Alma's on the gurney with all the diodes and everything connected to her. And for half a second, it almost looks like he's going to shoot Alma. And when she sees that, or when she thinks that Koenig is going to shoot Alma, she starts to freak out. And they're behind one-way glass. They're behind glass where Dr. Stevens, where Dan Stevens' character can't see that Henry and Gretchen are on the other side. Henry thinks, like, both Henry and Gretchen both think that Dr. Koenig is about to shoot Alma. Gretchen wants to stop him. Henry does not. Henry wants to exterminate every single one of these Homo cucurus that are around. So literally, he grabs Gretchen, who is trying to bang at the window to get Herr Koenig to not shoot Alma, and he actually puts her in a rear naked choke. He grabs her from behind, puts her in a fairly solid rear naked choke to prevent her from, giving away their location or preventing Koenig from shooting Alma. Luckily, Gretchen has a butterfly knife on her that she has throughout the entirety of the movie, pretty much, other than 1 or 2 scenes where it gets taken away from her. But for the most part, she has it the whole movie. She pulls out her butterfly knife, stabs Henry in the leg, which releases the rear naked choke. But then as Gretchen starts to get up to leave, he grabs her again. This time she stabs him in the side, like kind of near the kidney or liver area. And she actually twists the knife too. And the camera was very good to show us that she definitely twists the knife and then pulls it out in the hopes that Henry will bleed out. Henry then rolls off of Gretchen, and Gretchen gets up to try to find Alma. Now, what ends up happening is Gretchen runs into the Screeching Woman. And, we now know that the Screeching Woman is Alma's biological mother, who's basically trying to reclaim her daughter from the human surrogates that have had her for the last 8 or 9 years. So the Screeching Woman gives chase. She ends up going after Gretchen, but then when Gretchen notices that the Screeching Woman is in the same room, she actually grabs her sister Alma and holds Alma close to her, pulls out her butterfly knife, and then holds it above Alma's head, basically to tell the Screeching Woman, if you take one more step forward, I'm going to kill your daughter. The Screeching Woman sees this, kind of steps back a second, and just kind of lets Gretchen do what she's going to do. Like I said, Gretchen tells Alma, stay close to me and cover your ears. Unfortunately, Alma goes by a glass window, and in the reflection of the glass window, she sees Gretchen holding the knife above her head, and Alma misunderstands the situation. She actually thinks that Gretchen is trying to hurt her with the knife, so she literally pushes Gretchen halfway down the hall. These little Cuckoo things got some badass strength, I gotta say. She ends up pushing her sister away, and then she ends up, Alma, little sister, ends up running away and hiding in an office while the screeching lady gives chase to Gretchen. They end up going into a records room, a room that just has a lot of shelves of files and things like that. And they end up having a face-to-face, but they're separated by two of the rows. Like, they're looking through the space between the rows, and they're looking at each other, and they're literally like just standing upright, just staring at each other. At that exact moment, Henry walks into the room, realizes what's happening. He sees that the two women are in the rows of scaffolding staring at each other. So what he does is he pushes over the last scaffolding, and then we get a domino effect where all of the shelving units in front of that one topple over like dominoes. The screeching woman disappears, but Gretchen unfortunately ends up getting trapped underneath some of these shelving units. And her knife is a couple of feet away from her, and she can't reach it. Her legs are trapped underneath one of these scaffoldings. So eventually the screeching woman reappears, and she starts to climb over the scaffolding or the shelving units. And at this point, her sunglasses have fallen off, and her face starts to look kind of familiar. Like, you're looking at her and you're like, I feel like we've seen that face in this movie already, but you can't quite place it because she's got big black fucking eyes. Her veins are exposed all through her face, and she's got a blonde wig on. So it's like, she looks familiar, but I can't quite place her. What ends up happening is Alma is able to get the upper hand. She is able to reach her knife just as the screeching woman is about to pounce. Gretchen stabs the screeching woman in the neck. pretty gnarly stab. The screeching woman doesn't die right away. She kind of stands up, and she's screeching even louder while blood is just pouring out of her neck, out of her new wound. Eventually, Gretchen walks out of the records room to go back to her search for Alma. The screeching lady follows her right behind her into the hall, but then after taking literally just one or two steps in the hall, she's still bleeding profusely. She falls over and she dies permanently. The screeching woman is now dead. Now, Gretchen is curious as to who this woman is, so she actually walks up to the woman, pulls her wig off, and then we see it's fucking Trixie. It's the little redhead from the hotel. Now, how Trixie, this girl who looks like she's no older than like 23 or 24, is the biological mother of 9-year-old Alma, I don't know. Maybe these things age a lot slower than normal humans. I don't know. It just, like, all through the movie, Trixie has been this cute, likable little redhead, nothing nefarious about her whatsoever. And then suddenly it turns out she's the donor mother. But it's almost like maybe she doesn't know either, because when she's in the trance, when she's actually acting like the screeching woman, she's not speaking. She doesn't recognize anyone. Like, it's not like she recognized Gretchen as she was chasing her. So it's going to take a smarter man than me to explain what exactly. I even watched a couple of Ending Explained videos, and even they don't know what the fuck this whole thing implies. So maybe my co-host will have an opinion when we're done here. We're just about done with the walkthrough. At this point, Gretchen goes back upstairs to where Henry and Herr Koenig are having a Mexican standoff. They both have guns. Like I said, Herr Koenig just, killed everybody on his staff, and now he's going after Henry. As it turns out, we actually do get a reveal that Henry is no longer a policeman. He actually was released from the police department because he was investigating he was investigating a crime that had something to do with him personally. Of course, that was the death of his wife, which was described earlier. Once the police department caught wind that he was investigating the murder of his own wife, they basically, I'm sure they probably gave him a warning or two, but eventually, yeah, they basically let him go. So he's not actually a police officer right now, which is pretty interesting. Let's see, where are we? So we're back at the Mexican standoff. Dr. Koenig and Henry are on opposite sides of the room with their weapons. They're basically shooting at each other periodically to try to get the upper hand. But then eventually Gretchen shows up and she yells out to Herr Koenig, Dan Stevens, that Mother is dead. She's like, Mother's dead, and she's not going to be making any more of those damn things for you. Now, Herr Koenig doesn't believe her. He kind of chuckles and, like, how could this 17-year-old girl kill a superhuman, human cuckoo hybrid? So he doesn't take, he doesn't really take much stock into it. But then eventually Gretchen takes the bloody blonde wig that she pulled off of Trixie / the Screeching Woman and throws it into the room where, Koenig and Henry are having their shoot off. Finally, that's when he makes the realization, Dr. Koenig, that, oh shit, she really did kill Mother, which means that Alma is the last of these things left, because there was a scene earlier in the movie which I completely skipped, which it's not ultra vital to the story, but we kind of see the girl from the cold open, and it turns out that she is another one of these human cuckoo hybrids. She ends up attacking Gretchen, but ends up getting killed by Henry. Like I said, I didn't really go over that scene because it's not ultra vital. But back here, Henry and Dr. Koenig are shooting back and forth. At one point, they both run out of bullets at the exact same time, and they both go to reload. As soon as Gretchen hears the noise of them both reloading, she comes out of her hiding spot and runs right through the room, literally right down the center of the room, where they're on opposite sides shooting at each other. Eventually, they're both able to reload, and they start taking shots at each other again, but by this time, Gretchen has already made it across to the room where Alma is hiding. Now, in the office where Gretchen and Alma are not hiding from the two men with guns, Gretchen starts to explain to Alma about the situation earlier with the knife, telling her, I would never hurt you. I would never in a million years hurt you. She doesn't really go into much detail as to what she was doing. Like, I was just trying to play a trick on that other woman or whatever. She just says, I would never, ever hurt you. And then she lets Alma know that she heard, or no, she tells Alma, lying, of course, that her mother called. She's like, oh, my mother called, and my mother told me about the message that you left her, and I wanted to say thank you, both from me and my mother. My mother was very happy that you were so concerned with my well-being. Alma looks at Gretchen and signs, is she going to come visit? And Gretchen, starts crying and shaking her head and saying, no, unfortunately, she's not going to be able to visit. But she appreciates everything that you did. And at that moment, Alma realizes that Gretchen genuinely wouldn't hurt her and that, she basically loves her the way a sister is supposed to. They end up embracing in a nice big hug. And then they have to decide what to do. At this point, Gretchen yells out to Henry, do you still promise to protect me? Are you still going to protect me? And Henry said, yes, absolutely. No, nothing will happen to you. So what Gretchen ends up doing, and again, I fucking love Gretchen because this is brilliant. I don't know if this would actually work in real life, especially considering Dan Stevens had an assault rifle that looked ultra accurate. But what she ends up doing is she puts Alma on like a rolling tray that you would see like in a kitchen. And she puts Alma down on the tray so that Alma's back is facing Herr Koenig. And Eric Koenig would never shoot Alma because she is the last of the human cuckoos, and he's trying to preserve this species. So he would never shoot Alma, and then Gretchen stands while holding Alma so that her back is to Henry. And Henry has already promised that he won't hurt her, even though he did put her in a real rear naked choke earlier to try to stop her from giving away their position. But again, it does seem like Henry is being genuine. He says yes. And literally, she walks right down the middle of the room with Alma facing towards Dr. Koenig and Gretchen herself facing towards Henry, so that Henry can't shoot Alma and Dr. Koenig can't shoot Gretchen. Like I said, I don't know how effective this would be in real life, but I'm giving Gretchen all the credit in the world for coming up with this, because I don't think I would have fucking come up with this. This was brilliant. I don't care. She ends up getting to a point where she's at the end of the room, and Henry and Eric Koenig are right there on top of her. Like, I'm convinced they could have shot the person that they wanted to shoot if they really wanted to, but obviously for dramatic effect, they didn't do it. And what ends up happening is Alma basically takes her hands and covers Gretchen's ears, and then we see Alma start to do the screech. Yes, Alma has gone full cuckoo. She does the screech, and we don't see the situation from the viewpoint of Henry or Eric Koenig, but you have to assume that the time loop thing, which did happen a couple of more times in the film. I didn't describe every single time it happened. I just described that first time, but it does happen multiple times in the movie. So whenever the cuckoo screeches, anybody who's not her victim goes into a hypnotic state where they start to feel like they're going through a time loop, but time isn't actually looping. That's confirmed for us in the scene where the blonde girl from the cold open attacks Gretchen, because we see Gretchen go through the time loops, but we see the blonde girl is always farther ahead. Like, she's not going into a time loop, only Gretchen is. So it's kind of interesting. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interpretations of what this is, this ability and whatnot. And I look forward to reading some of those. But anyway, after Alma covers Gretchen's ears and then screeches herself, we see Henry and Eric Koenig both go into like a comatose state where they like drop their hands and their heads drop. At that point, Gretchen and Alma run out of the hospital, and as soon as Alma stops screeching, Henry and again with Dr. Stevens, Eric Koenig, they both come out of their traumatic state, comatose state at the exact same time. They aim their weapons at each other, and we hear both guns go off. We don't actually see them shoot each other, but we hear both guns go off, so we can assume that they killed each other. And then we see Alma and Gretchen walking out of the hospital. What's kind of funny is that as they're walking out of the hospital, the stranger is in the parking lot trying to steal a car. She literally just happens to be out in the parking lot trying to steal a car. Because don't forget, her car got totaled in the car accident, and she's obviously bad to the bone, so you can't keep her in a hospital longer than she wants to be. So literally, she's out with an IV attached to her, still in her hospital gown, trying to steal a car. And then the last scene that we get is we actually see the stranger driving Alma and Gretchen away from the hospital, whether they're going back home to Gretchen's, parents' place, or if they're actually going to Paris, and Gretchen is basically just like, oh, fuck it, I'm not giving Alma back to these people. Because one thing that's never really clarified in the movie is if Dad had anything to do with this. Now, obviously, Henry didn't have anything to do with his wife being attacked, so I guess we can make the assumption that Dad didn't know, but Dad is such a piece of shit to Gretchen in this movie that it leaves that kernel of doubt in your head of, Did he have anything to do with was he like the husband in Rosemary's Baby, where he actually did have something to do with this and just kind of played it off, or is dad completely innocent? That mystery is never really confirmed. But yeah, the final image of the movie is just the stranger, Gretchen, and Alma driving away peacefully, and the camera then pans down to the side of Alma's head, and we see her ears kind of move the way that I forgot to mention that at various times in this movie, the targets of the cuckoos, when they would hear the screeching, we'd see their ears kind of jiggle, like their ears would move, almost like an invisible force was pulling at them. And then that's the last thing we see in the movie. So are they setting up a sequel? Are they saying that Trixie didn't actually die? Are there other human cuckoo hybrids around? Who knows? But that's it, folks. That is Cuckoo 2024. I'm done.
So was my mouse. It was it decided to go to sleep, but it is now back awake. Yeah. Did you think for a second they were implying that like the dad might have been in on it too, and then they?
Well, that's what I was saying. Yeah, that's what I was saying at the end here, is that they kind of leave that open. We never get confirmation whether dad was or was not in on it. The only corroborating information would be the fact that Henry, the police officer, wasn't in on it when his wife was attacked.
Yeah.
So,
because they showed the picture, and then when the new wife was kind of feeling sick and he was taking her home, it was like, okay, is this just them trying to get rid of both of them, or is he in on it trying to get the wife out of the hospital so they could do the experiment? I wasn't 100% sure when I left the movie, and I was like, maybe I missed a dialogue, maybe they kept it open on purpose. So
there's definitely no dialogue confirming or denying whether dad was involved. But like I said, because of Henry's involvement or lack of involvement in his wife's attack, and then the other people who are attacked in the movie too, like the guy earlier in the film who apologizes for his wife puking in the lobby, like he seemed genuinely like distraught that his wife puked in the lobby. So my guess, nothing concrete, but my guess would be that the husbands have nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
That's just my guess.
It's the one that makes the most sense, but I mean, it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for our discussion on Cuckoo and this episode of Fresh Cuts. Venom, what you got, if anything, for people to listen to?
I don't think I have anything specifically new. Creature Comforts episode 27 is still the latest episode, where we looked at, or episode 28, I forget, where we looked at Creature from the Black Lagoon. We already have plans for the next episode, so look out for that before the end of August. Crystal Lake Gift Shop episode 5 is still the latest episode of that one, but we also have plans to record episode 6 of that one. That should also be out before the end of August, so look out for those 2 episodes. And then, of course, Fresh Cuts every week, and the main show, No More Room in Hell, whenever we can get together to do it.
Well said. All right, how about you, Dawn?
As mentioned, plans are in motion for the latest Creature Comforts. Again, we'll leave that one till it's in the bag and recorded before we can reveal everything. So we'll just keep that under wraps. My guest spot with the Paranormal is the New Normal show. I'm told it's on YouTube. It was a roundtable discussion on serial killer movies. So it should be available with them. It was I'm told it was streamed over YouTube, so it should be there. And there is a audio version that's available on most platforms. So if you search it up, you should be able to find it. And I think the only other thing is, I keep forgetting this, but the NFW podcast with a bunch of killer shark movies. I think the latest one was just released, which was Deep Fear. Or was that the last one we recorded? I don't remember. But yeah, we're doing a bunch of shark movies, and I'm available on those, so they should be available. And the only other thing is season 3 of Horror Countdown, which is available in its entirety with the rest of the shows. So go ahead and check that out wherever you find your podcasts.
Sounds good. As far as I go, nothing much other than the main stuff we do. Like I said, I did record with Duncan on the horror head-to-head, which I am under the belief that those episodes should start releasing soon. By those episodes, I just mean the entire series, not mine specifically. It just depends on the order that they are released in. Because I know with Duncan, it's because there's so many episodes usually, or so many recordings that go into like his big series stuff. Sometimes they're recorded out of order of the release of how they get released, so look for those. And other than that, nothing much. I got home repair stuff going on in my house, so I've kind of been like non-committal to anything in the next probably 2-3 weeks, other than my normal shows, just because like I don't want to start signing up for things and then it's like, oh, that can't it can't be possible because whatever's happening here. Oh, whole headache of a life. You know how it goes. But next time, our next episode should be Alien Romulus, correct? That releases this coming up Friday?
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to that one. It's like from all I really know, I mean, I've seen a trailer. I think the very first trailer from last year maybe, and all I know is I think it's like a one-off that takes place between Alien and Aliens. Other than that, it's a mystery to me as far as story goes. So I'll probably keep it that way because we're only a handful of days away. Dawn, I was just gonna ask the paranormal. The paranormal is the new normal is the name of it. The show?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what the topics were that you were on? I'm actually looking through the YouTube now.
Yeah, it should be top. It should be something like serial killer bracket. I don't remember what the actual thing was, but it should be within the last 2-3 weeks.
Okay.
If it's not there, maybe check live instead of videos, because maybe it being streamed, maybe it should show up on live. But it's called serial killer. It's something to do with a serial killer bracket.
All right, I will look for that, and everyone else should do the same. But with that said, that's going to wrap it up here. Catch y'all in a week with the next episode. Let's say bye to our listeners.
Later.
I've spent the last couple of years railing about the horror trope of the angsty teenager moving to a new country that she doesn't want to go to. But this movie shows that you can do that horror trope and it doesn't come off as insipid and annoying. So thank you, Tilman Singer, and long live Gretchen.
Peace.